This is Lance Shot. I just wanted to give a guide on Survival Hunter and talk about some of the talents that we have. This is a topic that is repeatedly, covered by multiple rank 1 players, far greater than myself. What I think that I bring to the table is a unique perspective on each of the talents and how I implement them myself. Not that they're the way and the only way, but a different perspective. So in the first tier, there's Viper Venom, Terms of Engagement, and Alpha Predator. I would say the go-to choices are Viper's Venom and Alpha Predator. Viper's Venom is good in my opinion against Destro Warlocks because it's been my experience that usually it's best. I find the most success beating locks at max range and using the pillar to my advantage. And so whenever it procs, it's definitely really nice. Combined with Murder of Crows, really does synergize pretty well for good burst damage during my kill windows. For Terms of Engagement, I can't really see it being valuable, especially in almost any setting, because it is very slow paced on killing people. So I don't see it resetting very often unless you're like insane with corruption. I don't think people will die fast enough so that you'll have any type of use for it. Alpha Predator, I think it's pretty nice because 2 charges on kill command is very useful, especially because it synergizes really well with Bloodseeker. So you keep a bleed on like a target that's trying to stealth really well. And then also if you're lacking in haste, it helps generate focus a little bit quicker, which is what I kind of like about it. Alright, in the second tier we have Guerrilla Tactics, Hydra's Bite, and Butchery. Now Guerrilla Tactics I feel is definitely the best option out of the 3. At the time, fire or your bombs are be the bulk of your damage, especially combined with Wildfire Infusion. Hydra's Bite. In Season 1, hunters used to take it against other hunters for the sole reason to whittle down the pet, but I feel like in late of the expansion, it's really not that useful, and I feel like you still get like a really good cleave with Guerrilla Tactics especially. I tried experimenting with Butchery, and Butchery, in my opinion, is really only good for scratching your back. It doesn't seem to synergize well with the rest of our abilities, and I just don't see it ever really being valuable. So in Tier 3, we have Trailblazer, Natural Mending, and Camouflage. Most of these matches that I find myself going with Camouflage. Having a good opener seems very nice. Against like a matchup against another hunter, Camouflage isn't that useful. Especially, you're just gonna find the hunter and you're never gonna go back stealth. So I would say Natural Mending against a hunter is really nice. Camouflage is good against like going up against like anything else that is like stealth, like a rogue or mage, a caster like a lock. I find it always taking it against a lock is very helpful because if I combined the survival tactics, I'm able to cleanse myself and just vanish. And that's always helpful. I mean, that's what I do against mages as well. And in some rare cases against rogues, if I have no bleeds or any dots on myself. When I go up against like a team that you know is definitely going to go your healer, Camouflage is not really a good defense. But I would say Natural Mending, because most of the time you're either going to be peeling or doing as much damage as possible, so you might as well get the benefit of spending focus to get that Natural Mending to be useful. In some cases, in twos, I like to take Trailblazer, especially when I'm chasing after a druid or going after a Mistweaver. The time that they fly across the map, it's pretty helpful if you can get to them quicker, especially if the DPS is going your healer. Most of the time you're not going to be in combat. You're just going to be chasing. So the extra speed boost is really nice, especially 30% combined with the cunning pet bonus to be able to move a little bit quicker. In Tier 4, we have Bloodseeker, Steel Trap, and Murder of Crows. I like to play with all of these depending on the situation. Against locks, I like to run Murder of Crows with the Viper's Venom. I feel like it just synergizes so well with the play style and the strategy that I go mostly for killing locks, because with Bloodseeker, you kind of want to be up close, and I find that that's really the danger zone, and it really depends on how good the lock is. I like to walk through locks when they're casting Chaos Bolt, but sometimes you get rooted, and it becomes very difficult in order to walk through them. So I prefer to be at a distance, hugging a pillar and just making it go. I CC the healer, and then I burst as hard as I can with all my cooldowns, and before they're about to retaliate, I like to retreat to the pillar. And the thing about Bloodseeker is I feel like it's just not an option to keep as much pressure on a lock from the pillar. You kind of have to be up close to make the best of it, especially if you tried the method. Let's say that you weren't rooted and you were able to walk through a lock. This is something I learned recently, because as a melee, I'm always moving forward with my mouse. As a caster, like locks and mages and everything of the sort, you're able to cast, and if someone walks through you to pretty much reset, all you have to do is kind of right click, and you wind up rotating without moving, rotating and still hitting your target. And it depends on how knowledgeable the caster is, but if they've pretty much nailed down the skill, it makes it so you can get hit with Chaos Bolt more effectively. With Steel Trap, I like this ability quite a lot. If you're running double DPS, this is such a good talent. It just gives you an extra ability to peel or to lure someone behind a pillar and then have them rooted with the trap so you can go after the healer to avoid taking damage. It's a really nice bleed if you use it on a rogue and he chases you behind a pillar. You root him, and as soon as he gets out, he's not going to be able to re-stealth because he has a bleed on him. I find it really nice, especially if you use it against a DK. He can't AMS through it. It's pretty good. And the last one here is Murder of Crows. Yeah, I like this ability. It used to be really, really good, and it used to be the go-to ability, but I found lately it just doesn't do enough damage to specific targets like DKs and warriors. They just don't seem to die within the kill windows. I would suggest probably running Bloodseeker. It just feels like it does more, and it's more effective against certain types of classes. I would say if you're facing like a double DPS and one of them is a hunter, it's pretty good against hunters. I would say that it's pretty terrible against mages and rogues. If mages are playing with a pally, it's just going to get bopped off. Either that, or they can block and it gets rid of it completely. I've seen it where I pop crows and it actually doesn't make a dent into the mage's shield, which is kind of embarrassing. And then rogues, they also can vanish it, so it's not very effective against them. And so Most of the time, it's probably better to just go Bloodseeker because you can at least keep the rogue out of stealth. You can still apply a bleed to the mage. It's just better pressure overall, in my opinion. In Tier 5, we have Born to be Wild, Post Haste, and Binding Shot. Now, Born to be Wild, it was similar to expansions before, where you would be able to shorten the cooldowns of our specific defenses. Better to meet the offensive abilities like a rat. Before you used to be able to turtle whenever they had damage, but now it doesn't quite synergize well, especially with all the RNG procs and the random wings out of nowhere, and so it's just not as valuable as it once was in similar expansions. Post haste, I would say, is definitely one of the better talents here because you can just fruit them out of anything, especially healer's not able to get your root. It's definitely a nice dispel. Another way to catch up to your target as well if you know how to disengage in the direction you need to go. So it's definitely helpful in that way. Most of the time I would take post haste, but Binding Shot is definitely going to almost feel like it's a must, especially against certain comps that go after your healer, particularly a Disc Priest. It just feels like you have to take care of your healer and the priest, or they're just going to flop over and die. So another way to protect them from DH is Binding Shot while you CC the healer. It also prevents them from doing reverse magic on your traps. So it's definitely if you're playing with the Disc Priest, I would consider using Binding Shot, especially against like warriors, DHs. I wouldn't use it against the DK, just mainly because permanent slow is ridiculous. Be taken out of the fight pretty effectively. Another thing that I like to do with Binding Shot involves when you're doing threes and you're possibly going to make an amazing swap to the healer. Like you already have it preconceived that that's what you're going to do with your teammate. Most of the time we go against like teams that have a resto druid. You do slight damage to the DPS. You make it seem pretty convincing that you're gonna commit to this target. When the druid shows up, you instant pet stun him. And then what I personally like to do, I like to throw Binding Shot immediately on top of them because their normal reaction is that they know that they're going to get swapped to. So what they're going to do is they're going to Trinket pet stun, and they're going to try to leap away as fast as possible. And so pretty much the idea behind this is to Binding Shot on top of pet stun, they Trinket and leap, and then get caught. It's kind of like putting a leash on them. And it makes it so that, one, they lose their one getaway button. They can still shapeshift it if they're a druid, but most of the time it's just going to be a matter of seconds. Like pet stun, put the leash on them, they Trinket, they try to leap, their leap fails. They only go like so far. It's actually pretty funny. And then they got to shape shift out of it. And then by that time, your partner's already either going to re-stun them, and just both of you are going to unleash hell upon this resto druid. May God have mercy on all those druids. Alright, in Tier 6, we have Tip of the Spear, Mongoose Bite, and Flanking Strike. I played around with all three of them. Tip of the Spear, it just doesn't seem to match up well against Mongoose Bite, which just seems way more superior in damage, like quickly. Flanking Strike, I would say, is pretty fun to play with. I wouldn't say it's a very good ability. It just seems pretty interesting, the idea to be able to leap to somebody with your pet. But I can see how it's probably not useful that much in Arena. All this is pretty much just advice. Figure out things for yourself. Maybe things that I believe aren't useful could be actually useful. I feel like there's a lot of things that I take that other hunters would say, no way, don't take that. I just enjoy playing a certain way that I've developed. But yes, out of this tier, I would say Mongoose Bite is definitely going to be your bread and butter. Make sure that when you're building up your buff to like 5 stacks, that you get as many Mongoose Bites as possible. And also with the Wildfire Infusion, just make sure the red and blue bomb spam that Mongoose Bite to get that nice bleed up to 3 stacks pretty much every time. And for the last tier, we have Birds of Prey, Wildfire Infusion, and Chukrums. Birds of Prey is, in my opinion, more for PvE, and I don't find it as useful in PvP, but that's just my opinion. Wildfire Infusion, I would say, is definitely the go-to. If you're lacking in haste, I feel like the red bombs really help for like building up, a burst. A lot of people don't like to top your focus and then, dump as much mongoose into a target. But I feel like if you're lacking in haste, make an effective dent into somebody, before you trap, I'd build up your focus, trap them, and then unload all your mongoose bites, just so that you can hit as many mongooses within your 5 stacks. Keep in mind with Wildfire Infusion that you gotta understand how the bombs work. The red and blue, you want to mongoose bite, so you build up the 3 stacks of bleeds. It's such a small window with the bomb. If you don't have enough focus for mongoose, then you want to mongoose as much as possible. And then when you know you're about to tap out on focus, you want to hit kill command in another mongoose bite. Your goal is pretty much to always get the 3 stacks of the bleed. It's useful for keeping people out of stealth, especially if you're not going them specifically, but if you're able to keep them out, it's also really nice. The red bomb, like if you're running with Bloodseeker, I like to spam kill command, which builds up the focus, and then you're also just spamming like a bleed on the target completely. Follow up once the bomb runs off or runs out. Just spam mongoose bite to my heart's content until I tap out. My least favorite of the bombs has to be the green bomb, and what it does is that it reapplies latent poison. Just don't find myself really using latent poison as much as I would like to. Especially if only really when someone gets out of my range that I'm pressing latent poison, just because it costs so much focus. It's nice that it reapplies it, but sometimes it'll be full duration, and then that's when the green bomb shows up. It's not really helpful at that point. Sometimes I just feel like it's a waste, but I mean, that's kind of just like randomness. And the last one is Chukrums. In previous expansions, it used to be like Glaive Toss, and Glaive Toss was so good. It was pretty much a snare, but it operated pretty much the same as Chukrums, and it used to do, well, a lot more damage than Chukrums. Chukrums, has a nice, pretty animation, and it's just not as good. I really don't find myself using it in any situation, just because Wildfire Infusion is just so much better, and I just get so much benefit out of using it. Up until this point, I probably share a lot of similarities with a lot of different hunters. But I think one of the things that I deviate and I really experiment is with the Gladiator's Medallion versus Adaption. A lot of people will say, don't take Adaption. That's probably one of the worst things you could take, and you're pretty stupid if you take it. However, I do like to play with it, and I'll explain how I use it. I use it pretty differently. So, in twos, when I specifically decide that I'm gonna go a Wrestler Druid, and the idea is to kill the Wrestler Druid before the DH or the Warrior or DK kills my healer. And if I wind up getting stunned, and then I wind up getting cloned, I can trinket the clone. What's also nice is that in some cases, if the druid isn't fast enough when I take adaption and I get bashed and they're gonna cyclone, sometimes they like to try to get distance, but if they mistime it, I have the opportunity to feign death. You have a lot of ways of getting out of a clone or preventing it. You get stunned. I play orc, so I like to have the shorter resistance to stun. It's pretty nice. In my opinion, I wind up getting stunned. Yeah, I get cyclone. I instantly get it out of it because of adaption. And if you can prevent the next clone by feign death, by stunning, by kicking, by LOSing, by trapping, prevent them from cycloning you full when adaption's down. And then basically the next time that they cyclone you, it's probably not even going to be worth it because you're going to wind up getting out of it immediately. And then you just kick them on the next cast are going to take a beating. And, it makes it so it discourages, druids from trying to CC you. Because if you just take the Gladiator's Medallion, it's a 2-minute cooldown, and it just seems like forever. And they can just pretty much cyclone you once you have no trinket. The only way to get out of it is that you're at the mercy of a disc priest. And if your disc priest is not going to be able to, basically, you're not going to be able to kill a Resto Druid before the DH can kill your priest. Unless your priest is just, a straight boss. He just can MC, but that's actually a really difficult task. And you shouldn't have high expectations like that for a disc priest. So another time, bear with me, that I use adaption is against Destro Warlock. And you're probably thinking that's an insane idea. But hear me out first. So picture your healer takes adaption. Say you're playing with a Resto Druid, right? So the way that it works is that if you can avoid motor coil, and the key to beating any Warlock team is you avoid the motor coil, one of you. So basically whoever has Havoc, dispel it. And if you can't dispel it, then just LOS until your healer can. And then you just go eat the motor coil. And as long as they're either dispelled Havoc specifically, they dispel it, or they just LOS and you go eat a motor coil, you pretty much can avoid both being motor coiled. And then at that point, you both should still both have your adaption, because adaption doesn't proc off a motor coil. That's the weakness to take an adaption. But at the same time, the next time that a Warlock casts Fear, it's instantly dispelled because of adaption. And then if you get Feared again, it's a DR'd one, and it's half. And then if your healer can dispel that one, that's even better. And I find that so helpful when I try to make it go on a Warlock, because it's actually quite frustrating because your healer has to be pretty spot on. And the thing is, if they wind up getting CC'd for a split second while you're feared and they're casting bolts, things can get pretty ugly. And myself, usually when I try to escape during Dark Soul to a pillar, I wind up getting rooted, feared, bolted, feared, and then I'm pretty much dead, or I barely survive. But if you get feared on your disengage, you pretty much get instantly cleansed, and you just can hide to a pillar and wait a minute. You're not going to kill a Destro Warlock immediately. You can, but it doesn't quite happen as often as I would hope and that I would like. But so it's pretty nice so that whenever you make your go, it can't be stopped for a certain amount of time. You can't get triple feared, but it's going to be so short, and you can at least feign death, use knock or silence, run back to a pillar every time you have post haste. I'd say that the key is to wear them down, and the longer you go, the more chances you have at killing them. And eventually they'll run out of ways of surviving, and you can finish them off. I mean, that's another way I personally use it. I like adaption for that specific team. I would say in threes. I've experimented with my partner and I and our healer. Usually the healer, it's probably not a good idea, but for both DPS, if you think about it, the healer can only dispel one person at a time, right? So if he dispelled your partner, you're going to sit at full CC. If he dispels you, your partner's going to sit at full CC. You know, if you both make a go and you cross CC, like let's say for instance you go up against a warlock and a fire mage. If you both take adaption, you know, you're both going to be out of CC. The rest of it is avoiding it. And if you get CC'd, sometimes when you're escaping, you're just out, you get instantly cleansed and you tied to a pillar. You know, it's just so helpful in my opinion. If you run with a disc priest and they take 2 dispels, it's even better. It's just you instantly dispelled, and he dispels you again when you get a second fear or poly. You know, it's just, in my opinion, I like to run it. Maybe it's not the very best, but you know, that's my mindset about it. I find it fun, and going up against those comps, you know, it feels like you can't play your class for a certain period of time, and so it makes it a little bit more interesting instead of a little bit boring and frustrating. For the time, to be honest, they're doing so much damage. Sometimes your healer really is afraid to take the time to dispel. For my PvP talents that I like to take, I usually like to take Tracker's Net, Mending, and Roar Sacrifice. You know, especially against fire mages, Roar Sacrifice is really good, you know, for combustion, and it just counters it pretty well. Most of the time I'm going to take it. The only time I don't take it is against Destrolox. And to be honest, Destrolox and Shadow Priest, I feel like it just doesn't do much there. You know, it's just not that helpful in my opinion. Also against, you know, I guess this is kind of debatable. You know, I like to take other talents when I go up against a Windwalker, because I don't like to CC the healer and go Windwalker. You know, Touch of Karma, other various reasons, you know, it just feels like they overpower me, and they just can kite and get away whenever they find that they're in danger. Let's go healer. And so the only time I really worry about probably sack is probably against anything like rogues, mages, warriors, other hunters. And that's pretty much the only time I really take pet sack. Tracker's Net has to be one of my favorite abilities. I've made a video in the past about how to use it, but I would say, for example, it's really good whenever you're trying to go healer. You can just root the DPS and to keep them off you and your healer, and sometimes they wind up misusing their stuns and missing. I would say it's really good against Rogue Mage. What's going to happen especially during this season, usually Rogue Mage will CC one target, and then they wind up kidneying whoever they want to kill. And it's pretty obvious, whenever they kidney somebody, it's pretty much they're going to commit all cooldowns to that person in hopes of killing them immediately. And, you know, sometimes you got to pay attention for, are they going to go your healer? Are they going to go you? And so, you know, there's a danger to trinketing poly immediately, but sometimes their damage is just so grotesque and so overwhelming that they can force all your cooldowns in their first go, especially with combustion, even with sack and other stuff that's happening. So, for example, if they go me, my goal is to CC the rogue. So if my healer winds up polyed, I know that he's not wanting to trinket. But if he has to trinket, I have to be ready to root the rogue, because I know exactly what's coming next. And most of the time, rogues are paying attention, like, oh, he just trinketed poly, you know, and it depends. You know, maybe the mage might go for another poly, but if you're paying attention to the positioning of the rogue, is he walking into blind, can root the rogue and time it perfectly for when he's going to blind. It's pretty obvious. The more time and the more experience you have with it, the better you can predict when a rogue's going to do it. Most of the time, if they go healer, I know that they're going to kidney my healer and I'm going to sit a poly. And it's actually really scary when your healer has no way out. They get a full kidney and you get a full poly, and you're going to go right into another poly. But then, if you trinket poly, you're going to eat blind, and then pretty much you can't help do anything at that point. Your healer is probably going to die. So, in my opinion, I like to go mage. So I pretty much know, okay, I got polyed. Is he close enough to poly me again? No, he's not. The rogue's actually closer to my proximity. So I know I'm going to get blind as soon as I trinket. So what I do is I trinket. My first global is Tracker's Net. And I pretty much avoid blind that way. That's one of the key ways that I use it. And it's just actually, depending on certain comps, it's pretty valuable. If you're not going to take Tracker's Net and you would rather take Survival Tactics to one, cleanse Maledicts and various other things, and to reduce damage, which is another option, you can run the Steel Drop. It's to be one of the most pivotal abilities that hunters have. It really does make or break some matchups. If you don't know when to use it against a rogue, it could definitely cost you the match. And so if they're usually going my healer, they usually kidney. I like to channel mending. It's up to the healer. Sometimes the rogue is committing so much energy to doing damage your healer that they just don't have the time or the energy to hit you. Really, all they have to do is auto hit you, and it stops you from channeling it. But you'd be surprised how many rogues aren't paying attention to you channeling mending on your healer in the full kidney. And so it's actually pretty helpful for countering their pressure, especially with Vendetta and full bleeds. And it's also really good against ferals. Survival Tactics is definitely a really good choice, especially if you're planning on swapping out some talents to reduce damage, especially against like warlocks. You could definitely use Survival Tactics and Feign Death to reduce, a Chaos Bolt. It's one effective way to eat a bolt to the face. Another important time that you would probably want to use it is against a Windwalker whenever they put Touch of Death. Pretty much, you gotta time it just right. Like Touch of Death is about to wear off, and then that's when you're gonna see a true dip in your health. And I'm not exaggerating. It is a pretty big deal. If you're able to feign death at the right second, right when it's about to land, it can reduce the damage by 99%. And if you nail it, you'll notice that your health really doesn't move. But if you miss, you wind up seeing a chunk of your life just disappear. Diamond Ice is actually really nice whenever you're going up against something like a Shaman melee. Sometimes that team can be really tanky, especially if they're running with like a DH. What I find really nice is that I can use it to prevent heals whenever the healer is using the pillar to avoid me. Sometimes chasing to get a trap on like the Shaman proves to be really difficult, especially if they earth grab and just use Ghost Woof to avoid you completely. So what I like to do is whenever they do come into line of sight, I just trap the DPS, which my healer can either cyclone the DPS or they can cyclone the healer whenever possible. Whenever I go healer and I want to CC the melee, I usually put it on the warrior and DH and swap back and forth sometimes depending on whether I have access to the healer. Whenever the healer is in line of sight, I'm doing damage to the healer, but whenever I can't, I pretty much swap to the DPS and to whittle them down eventually to prevent any heal, just throw Diamond Ice on the DPS. It also keeps them off my healer and it can't be dispelled, so it's super good, especially whenever I combine the two with the Diamond Ice into a root. It just synergizes super well. I love to use Knockback Trap or High Explosive Trap. One of my favorite abilities, depending on which map you're in an arena. If you're on the bridge, you can one-shot somebody if you can do it right. If you're able to do enough damage to a melee and just stun the healer and then trap the healer, and if you're able to knock the DPS off the map in the opposite direction and harpoon, you can finish anybody. It depends on certain classes. It's most effective against other hunters, which I think is a nice way to end a match really quickly. You can also use it at the end of a trap. So, for example, you can stun the healer into a trap, and you know that you have no more CC, or your healer is too far to either cyclone or fear off the trap. So it's pretty nice if you knock the healer, like let's say it's a priest, you knock them off and they are down below, and if you root them down below so that they can't get back up, it's such a wonderful play if you're looking for it. Spider Sting is pretty good against mages, especially fire mages. If they get a poly, then they can't just kill you with GPI. They have to wait at least 4 seconds unless they get dispelled. Well, same thing with lock. If they get a fear off, then they can't chaos bolt, and it just gives you some room to either find a pillar or get ready to use another defensive ability to counter chaos bolt or avoid it. I actually think Scorpion Sting doesn't really do much, and I actually wouldn't waste a talent on it specifically, just because I just don't feel like it does enough, and I actually really don't notice it at all. Now, Dragon Scale Armor is pretty nice. If you're going up against something that is very dot cleavy, like I would say Affliction Warlocks or Boomies or Shadow Priests, combine that with the survival tactics, and it's pretty nice for countering their damage. And if you run with a Holy Pally, they can use their shadow damage resistance talent, and it's very nice. It's pretty much easy mode at that point, especially if they run like the cleanse talent and they're able to cleanse both of you while being aggressive. It's very useful. Now, Viper's Sting, I think it's just my imagination, but I like to use it against DHs, especially when they pop meta. Sometimes you'll get them really low and they pop meta, and you just kind of want them to die. And it's my hope that if I have Viper's Venom, it'll at least reduce leech by 30%. But that's kind of just wishful thinking. Mostly I use against Resto Druids. It's really nice when they're just hotting themselves instantly and just running around a pillar. Sometimes they don't even notice that it's up. It's between the Maledict. If they are going to dispel the Maledict, then I throw up the Viper's Sting, and it's pretty nice. So this is my take on all the talents and PvP talents that we have at our disposal. I wouldn't say that there's one way to play Hunter. There's definitely different ways to be creative with what we're given. Certain talents are definitely going to be useless no matter what, but I feel like we just got to be as creative as possible to use what we have in order to be successful at taking down some of these comps. And it's definitely fun to toy around with what we have as Hunter. A lot of these suggestions are pretty much just my experience and how I have fun playing my Hunter. And I would like to share the advice with all the other Hunters in the Hunter community, just so that we can take on different classes a lot better than we are now. So hopefully, this has inspired you to try something different other than what's been recommended over and over for every situation, and just develop your own play style. Try to implement different things that you haven't tried before. I hope this has shed some perspective on how to play Hunter in a very different way, and I hope that you guys have fun with some of the stuff that I shared and maybe try out some of the new ideas that I've suggested. And as always, thank you for watching this video and supporting me.
You and I, we're always on the edge. We fight and make love at the same time. Would you break up just because I told you?